Hi everyone, welcome back again already with a different game. I'm still gathering footage to put together for the next video, my Red Winter Vassal project, but as I wait for the next turn, in the meantime I thought I would take a look at different games. This is Labyrinth, designed by Volko Ruhnke, published by GMT in 2010, and it's a game that I was not planning on covering on this channel, let alone purchasing until very recently when I found it for a pretty good deal used online. And then just on a whim a few days ago I cracked it open for the first time and tried it out face to face a couple of games, and on the same night one game solitaire using the included solitaire flowchart, and had a really great experience. But it's a game that I was avoiding for a really long time for numerous reasons. One being based on my experiences with Twilight Struggle, which is another two-player card-driven game. Experiences, or I should say failed attempt at it, back when I was first entering the hobby. And I picked it up as I was in search of the ultimate two-player board gaming experience. And I still think that that game fits that criteria better than most other board games, at least that I've played. But just because you buy the ultimate two-player board gaming experience doesn't mean you're going to have that, especially if you're finding it difficult to locate another player who would be as interested as you are in exploring the game, which was the case for me, which is why I tried to play it more often than not solitaire. At first I tried playing both sides, just following the normal rules, and that just for me doesn't work it just didn't work that well. And I didn't give up. I went online, tried to find a solitaire variant. I found one that I think is a fan-made variant, and tried that out a couple of times as well, and that was a little better, but it just didn't feel, it just departed too much from the original feel of the game. So I ended up getting rid of the game, and I don't know if I regret it. I feel like I might regret it. I might end up getting it again sometime, but that basically nixed off all two-player CDGs from my potential games to buy list. So the minute I found out something was a strictly two-player card-driven game, I immediately was disinterested in the game. Until I came across this, I think it was on Marco's channel, and I saw that it was a two-player card-driven game, but that it included in the box a set of solitaire rules, and that really intrigued me. But I was still hesitating because modern conflicts are not something that I'm really drawn to as a board gaming topic. So I just never really made it to my shopping cart until recently, when I started exploring more and more war games and coming across, recognizing designer names. And since this came out quite a while ago, there are a lot of videos on it already, really good videos. This definitely is not a board gaming news channel, definitely not a Cult of the New type of channel, and if anything, it's just my personal gaming log that I put up publicly in video format. But if you're interested, I'd like to take a look at the game, the solitaire rules in particular. I found the new and improved, newer flowchart that I wanted to take a look at. I haven't done so yet, but I have a feeling that I would really like just soloing the two-player game, and I have an inkling that I may even prefer it that way. The solitaire flowchart, I've tried it once. It's pretty convoluted, difficult to follow for me. I've never played a board game along with such an involved flowchart before. I'm going to give it another shot. Hopefully this newer version is going to be more a smoother experience. But unlike Twilight Struggle, this game does not have regional scoring cards. And it doesn't have a lot of these reaction cards that cancel events mid-turn during your opponent's turn. The number one problem with Twilight Struggle for me was the regional scoring cards. And I thought that was kind of like a fundamental part of two-player card-driven games, and I'm happy to find out that it's not, because this means that I might be able to explore other two-player only card-driven games. But like I said, the inclusion of solitaire rules was a definite, was a very big factor for me in purchasing the game. Let's get started. Another reason to choose to cover this game is because it's a really difficult game to talk about. It's a big challenge, and it's an interesting one to try to deal with. Most of what you see on the board is very much from the perspective of the U.S. player, with respect to the U.S. player, and that includes the various levels of governance and alignment of the countries. And this idea of governance is one that's very abstract to me, and it can range. There are basically 4 different levels that range from good, fair, poor to Islamist rule, and it basically really, to me, only signifies how close a country is to qualifying as being under Islamist rule, and even that qualification in itself is very much from the perspective of the U.S. player in the way that it affects what they're trying to accomplish. I think that there are lots of elements that are being left out in order to investigate this one aspect in how the U.S. is approaching this situation from a very specific angle. And that's probably about all that I really want to say about what this game may or may not be trying to represent. And from here on out, I'm just going to focus on the gameplay. Here is a close-up of the victory track with the markers in their starting locations per the Let's Roll scenario-specific setup instructions and the initial state of the board. The good resources marker starts out at 0 because there are no countries at the beginning of the game under good governance that also have a resource value. Islamist resources is at 1 for Afghanistan, which begins the game under Islamist rule with 1 resource value. There are 3 fair or good Muslim countries, fair or good governance Muslim countries, which includes Syria, the Gulf states, and Pakistan. There are 4 poor or Islamist countries, including Libya, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and Afghanistan. Looking at the victory conditions for the solitaire game, we see that the jihadist AI wins, and I think this is an automatic victory condition, if the Islamist resources marker ever reaches the 6th spot. They also win if at the end of the game you've failed to bring your good resources marker up to a certain level. That level is dependent upon the length of game that you choose to play, of which there are 3 options. The 1-deck standard game, which is the only way I've ever played it, the 2-deck tournament final game, or the full 3-deck campaign game, which is the way I believe it was intended to be played, and which is where I've placed my deck marker on this deck track, at least for now, until I realize that it's just gonna, it may be fine, or I may feel like it's a little too long of a game for this particular video series. It's very easy to switch it, to drop it down later on if I choose that it's too long, but we're gonna shoot for the campaign game. By the way, I really like the look of this game, the graphic design, the components, the look of the map, the artwork on the counters. Everything is very easy to read, clear, clean, and bright, and I also really like this kind of mixed medium thing going on with wooden and cardboard components. I think it's a look that is very unique and very attractive as a game. To me, at least, it draws me in. It's probably because it doesn't look like every other game out there. And it also kind of is, or maybe a sense of familiarity that I get from wooden cubes, I don't know, but it's a very inviting look, and it seems also to be kind of a signature of the designer as far as component choice is concerned. He seems to go for this look on quite a few of his games, at least the other series that he does, the coin series. I've seen this similar type of look. That's one that I really like. Well, now that we have the camera pointing in this direction, let's take a look at these country area boxes. Here's a close-up of Saudi Arabia. On the left here, on the upper left, is a number that denotes its resources value. On the right here is an icon that tells you whether the country is a Muslim or non-Muslim country, and also if it's a Muslim country, what type of Muslim country it is. In this case, the white crescent, green background means it's a Shia mixed country, whereas its neighbor here, with the white background, Jordan, is a Sunni Muslim country. You can see also that Saudi Arabia itself has this kind of oil rig icon on it, in it, around it, meaning it's an oil exporter. It starts out with this red poor governance marker of value 3, and the position of that marker is very important as well. Right here, these 3 boxes comprise the alignment track. On the left is a spot for ally, then neutral in the middle, and adversary on the right. So this Saudi Arabia starts out as a U.S. ally with a governance level of poor ally from here on out. It also starts out with these 2 cubes. Each one represents a unit of U.S. troops. So it's a U.S. occupied, oil exporting, U.S. ally under poor governance. Whereas over here, taking a look at Afghanistan, you can see that it starts out under Islamist rule, which always means that it's an adversary. It is a Shia mixed country with a resources value of 1. And instead of cubes, it has these 4 black cylinders. Each one represents a cell, a jihadist cell. And that affects gameplay in various ways. We'll see all that later. And then looking back up here, above the deck track, you'll see the play sequence and kind of the action phases track that tracks all the card play. So we start with the jihadist action phase, and they play, well, in this case the AI will resolve 2 cards for the AI, and then we enter the US action phase and select and play 2 cards from our hand, and at the end we resolve any plots that are on the board, and those plot markers are down here in the available plots spot in checkerboard fashion for no reason whatsoever. They're face down and shuffled, randomized. I don't quite remember how that's dealt when playing the solitaire game, but usually the jihadist player would be able to flip them over secretly and look to see what they are and place them face down on the board when it comes time to placing plot events. So if there are any on the board at that point, they're resolved. That does not constitute a turn. A turn is a whole hand of cards, when a whole hand of card is played. And that whole hand represents a passage of time of 1 year, more or less. And that whole hand is also 1 turn. So you can have several action phases and plot resolutions occurring during a single turn. And then after all of that, there's this cleanup phase of adjusting jihadist funding, US prestige, etc., removing lapsing events, resetting reserves, dealing new hands, and over here is where we keep track of the number of available US troops, jihadist cells, each player's hand size, or draw limit actually. There's no maximum hand size, etc. I think that's going to be about it as far as a rules refresher, and we're going to jump right into turn 1. Here's the board at the end of the first jihadist action phase. With their first card, they performed a recruit action, bringing in cells to Afghanistan. Then, with their second card, they performed radicalization, which resulted in the governance level of Pakistan dropping to poor, and 2 cells traveling, one to Somalia, which also starts out with a poor governance level, and another one all the way to Canada, which begins the game soft. That drops the US-GWT relations to 0, while the US remains hard on its stance toward the global war on terror. We're looking over here at the victory track currently. The fair good countries is dropped down to 2, meanwhile poor Islamist countries is up to a 6. During the US action phase, we had a whole slew of lucky die rolls. We spent a 2-op card in Canada to roll once on the War of Ideas table to switch their posture from soft to hard, thus bringing the relations up to 1 hard and the prestige up from 7 to 8. Then we spent a 3-op card in Afghanistan to conduct a regime change. They're now a fair ally, and for prestige we gained another 2, bringing us up to 10 with a very high zone of the prestige track. Both of those cards were jihadist events, neither of which were triggered. The jihadist AI responded by conducting a minor jihad in Afghanistan, bringing their governance down to poor, then played the Lebanon War event, which caused US prestige to drop down to high, or a 9, a cell to pop up in Somalia, and 2 cells to return to the jihadist funding track. The US player lost a 3-op unassociated event card. During the US action phase, we played a 3-op card in Afghanistan to disrupt and remove 2 active cells, placing it back on the funding track and increasing our prestige 1 back up to very high. We then played an event card, Sistani, and improved governance in Afghanistan again, back up from poor to fair. During the jihadist action phase, the first card to be played was Oil Price Spike, which is a lapsing event that increases resources of each oil exporter by 1 for the rest of the turn, which really does nothing since no one has any resources at this point. But with it, they drew a 3-op jihadist associated event, and ended up spending 2 of those op points in Afghanistan to conduct a minor jihad. Both attempts failed. Both cells were returned to the funding track. Another fairly lucky die roll for the US this action phase, as we conducted a War of Ideas in Afghanistan to improve governance 1 level from fair to good. We spent our second card to deploy all 6 troop cubes from Afghanistan back to the troop track, bringing it down to low intensity just in time as we enter our final phases here before we draw a new hand of cards. No events were triggered. A fairly straightforward action phase for the jihadist AI this time around. They spent a 3-op card to successfully recruit 2 new sleeper cells in Somalia, a besieged regime, and then they played the event Ansar Islam to place a new cell in Iraq. That event was removed. For the US action phase, we spent both of our remaining cards, both 2-op cards, both jihadist events that can't be triggered, to conduct back-to-back War of Ideas on the Gulf states to improve their governance from fair to good. 1 of the rolls succeeded, and that brought our good resources all the way up to 5 because of the oil price spike that will remain in effect for the rest of the turn. Here's the board at the end of the first turn, the first year roughly. The US ran out of cards before the jihadist player. They had 2 cards remaining to play. It was a good turn for them. They were able to play XKGB to turn Central Asia into a poor adversary, and then played their first plot action to place a level 2 plot in the Gulf states. Luckily they failed in worsening the governance there, but it did drop our prestige down to 9, or the high section of the track. So now we'll do our end of turn kind of cleanup phase, dropping funding down to 8. Luckily our prestige does not drop any further because there are no countries under Islamist rule, but we don't get the +1 either. So we'll remove price spike and deal new hands, start a new turn.